Melissa was right in her struggle with this particular passage. It's a horror story, plain and simple. And it's a horror story because, or on many levels, layers. It's a horror story by the story that it tells. And as we hear it, we hopefully will be shaking our heads and our hearts will be moved and we'll wonder, how is it that human beings could treat each other like this? And it's a horror story in addition because this is one of the examples that people, Christians, used to justify slavery. And what is just unbelievable about this, beyond ironic about this, is that in actuality, this is a story about how slavery is wrong. And yet, people twisted the words, twisted the meaning, and over time, people began to hear and believe in that second meaning of the reading of this passage. Because we had to rationalize why slavery was okay, why it was allowed to continue. One of the most important things that we need to remember as we hear stories, as we think about how it is and why it is that people might have interpreted scripture passages in certain ways, it's important for us to remember that slavery, as far back as it was a practice, which goes back thousands of years, slavery was an economic boon for those who enslaved others. It was free labor. And originally slavery emerged as one tribe, as one nation would overcome another in war, and the prisoners that they took would be made slaves. And this practice continued on for hundreds, thousands of years. There did become a point in which people started to raise their voices and say, this is inhuman that one person should own another, that one person should be able to treat another person as property. But unfortunately, there were other people who had figured out that if you could go round up people, even if you hadn't defeated them in war, if you could round up people and then sell them as slaves, the economic benefit to you would be even greater. And because of the power of an economic argument, the power of the argument of profit, we as humans began to rationalize why it would be possibly okay for one human to own another, for one human to treat another as property. And we developed ideas to rationalize that, racist ideas, and they're with us still. If we're going to overcome them, we need to recognize where they come from, what some of the lies are that we've been told, what some of the misinterpretations are that have been passed on to us, including misinterpretations of Scripture. Because unfortunately, we as Christians have been complicit in this allowance of slavery and this allowance of racism. So I'd ask that we might keep all of that in mind as we listen for the various layers of this story. We're reading from the book of Genesis. We're reading from chapter 21, verses 8 through 19. 8 through 21. The child Isaac grew and was weaned, saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife from him from the land of Egypt. May God bless this reading from Holy Scripture to our understanding. So just a little bit of a backstory so we have a fuller context here. God has come to Abraham and Sarah and promised that they would have a son and he would be the father of a great nation. This was amazing news to Abraham and Sarah when they heard it, because they were very old, and despite trying, they had not been able to have any children. Sarah was not able to conceive. But they heard this promise and they were hopeful. But as a period of time went by and Sarah had still not become pregnant, they decided, Abraham and Sarah, that maybe what they needed to do was get creative. And so Sarah took one of her slave women, Hagar, and said, "I want you to take my slave woman and see if you can get her pregnant." And Abraham makes her one of his wives, and indeed she becomes pregnant. And she gives birth to a child, Ishmael. But then Sarah becomes pregnant. The miracle occurs, and she gives birth to her son, Isaac. And as our passage begins, we're told that there's a celebration. Isaac has been weaned, and they're all very excited about this. And Sarah sees Ishmael and Isaac playing together, and she becomes jealous. She becomes greedy. She doesn't want her son, the son that she bore, Isaac, to have to share being the leader and father of a great nation. She wants it all for him. And so she says to her husband, Abraham, get rid of him. Get rid of the two of them. And we're told Abraham is upset by this news because of his son. Apparently he is not nearly as worried about Hagar. But we're also told that God comes to Abraham in a dream and says, don't worry, do what Sarah says, I will take care of them. Because Ishmael is the fruit of your womb, I will also make a great nation of him. And so we're told that Abraham gives Hagar a wineskin that's filled with water and some bread and sends her off. Be on your way. And off she goes into the wilderness. Now we need to understand this is a death sentence. Hagar understands this. She knows that she and her son will not survive long in this barren place. And once the water is gone, the bread is gone, she realizes that death is coming close, and she puts her son a distance away because she can't stand the thought of having to watch him die slowly. And she raises her voice in anguish. And the child is crying because he's thirsty and he's hungry and he doesn't know where his mother is. And we're told that God hears these cries and sends an angel to Hagar. He must not be a very intelligent angel because he asks Hagar why she's worried. And she tells him. And we're told that God opens Hagar's eyes. She sees a well. She's able to give Ishmael and herself something to drink. She's then able to care for him in some way. And Ishmael grows. She eventually finds a wife for him. And he does indeed become the father of a great nation. It is a nation that has within it the seeds of the Islamic faith. End of story. So this story is meant to be horrifying to the people who are hearing it. It's meant to be horrifying because Abraham and Sarah, who are good people for the most part, succumb to feelings of greed and jealousy, despite the fact that they're good people, despite the fact that they have had conversations with God and God has promised them and delivered on this promise. Despite all that, they get jealous and they get greedy. And because the institution of slavery is something that is a part of their lives, they're able to treat Hagar and Ishmael so horrifically. They're able to just cast them off. We're done with you. We have no more need of you. You're less than us. Be gone with you. This is a story about how horrific that is. This is a story about how God has been trying to get across to people for a long, long time just how horrible slavery is. We're reminded once again in this story that God freed the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt. This is what God does. God seeks to free people. God seeks to not allow slavery to be the way that human beings relate to one another, interact with one another. Even though it's a roundabout way, God takes care of Hagar and Ishmael. This is supposed to be another part of the lesson of this story, that it's horrific how human beings treat each other, and that God is trying to get human beings to see that slavery is wrong, how wrong it is, and that God will do what God can do to help. what is incredibly ironic, and irony just doesn't catch just how wrong this is that people, including people in America, used a passage like this and other passages about slavery that we find in the Hebrew scriptures and we find in the New Testament to say that really what this passage is saying is that God is okay with slavery. That God really didn't mind that, that Hagar was a slave and that Sarah was able to just tell her she was now going to be one of Abraham's wives, and that she would have to do whatever he said, and then when they were done with them, that they could be cast off. People argued that this passage, because God eventually takes care of Abraham and or takes care of Ishmael and Hagar, that God's okay with slavery. That God thinks it's all right. That God sanctions actually the practice of slavery. I think it's fair to say that we would not believe that that's true. That we don't believe that God thinks that it's okay for one human being to own another human being, so that the owner can profit. But we have used scripture passages because we see them as holy passages. We see them as a way that it describes what is important to God in the world. And we're willing to twist those words. And we've been willing to twist those words for ages. And we're willing to continue to believe those words. And it's something that we have to own up to. We have to own up to the misuse of Scripture, the abuse of Scripture, to reinforce our inhuman practices. Now, what else is true over the history of humans' interactions with each other, and particularly around the institution of slavery, is that people started to say, this is wrong. Slavery is wrong. And we really shouldn't be doing this. And those who were engaging in the practice of buying and selling slaves and using slaves realized that they needed to come up with some more rationale. And out of that, because at that point in time, the practice of going to Africa and capturing slaves and bringing them to Europe and then eventually bringing them to America was expanding. The rationalization was put forward that people of darker skin were inferior to people with lighter skin, and therefore it was okay that those people were enslaved. And again, ironically, though that doesn't catch the meaning of the word, they used scripture passages to reinforce that. A story about Ham, one of Noah's sons. Though, if you read that in scripture, you would be hard-pressed to understand how this could possibly be a rationalization. But it was used and it was believed, and it has been passed on and on and on. And its consequences remain with us today. We have to recognize, as people of faith, as people who are Christian, we have to ask ourselves first, do we actually believe that God is in favor of slavery and that God is a racist? And I think our first response to that question would be, well, no, of course not. Okay. let's hold that thought. Now, when we begin to look back and say, well, where did these ideas come from? And how is it that they became so entrenched in our way of thinking? Not only in our religious way of thinking, but also our cultural way of thinking. How did this happen? We have to recognize and admit and confess that Scripture was used inappropriately. And that Christians over time reinforced that inappropriate reading and interpretation of Scripture. And that we didn't raise our voices, or enough of us didn't raise our voices to say this is wrong and it needs to stop. And now we come to a place today in which we are continuing to wrestle with the fruits of our racist past. And we struggle with, well, there's no slavery today. There's equal opportunities for everybody. I'm not sure why we're still talking about this. Why do I have to pay attention to this? And that's a testament to how deeply these ideas have become ingrained in us. It's how much we've bought into this, and how much systems in our country and our culture reinforce these ideas. You see, good people like Abraham and Sarah, they can be racist. They were not so much racist, because in actuality, Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael probably all had very similar color scheme. It was all dark, by the way. But they believed that God approved of the institution of slavery. And therefore, that belief allowed them to be engaged in horrific acts. And today we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we believe in that allows us to continue to be engaged in horrific acts? And allowing our criminal justice system and our prisons to hold such a much higher percentage of people of color than of white people, despite the population percentages, despite how trials work out. We have to ask ourselves, why is it that people of color live in the area or go to school systems that are so underfunded? We have to ask ourselves, why is it that we, as an education system as a whole, don't teach the full history of our country and our people? We have to ask ourselves why economic opportunities, housing opportunities are so much more difficult for people of color. See, these are real. We don't like to believe these things are true, but they are, and they have been. It's hard for us to fathom, but it's true. And if indeed we don't believe that God is a racist, if we believe that God has been trying to get across to us for a long time, that we should be loving one another as we love ourselves, and we have to learn our history. We have to recognize how we got to where we are, the beliefs that have shaped us, and then we need to change. And we each need to do it as individuals, and we need to do it as a community or communities of faith, and we need to do it as communities in which we live, the state in which we live, the country in which we live, the world in which we live. This story is a horror story. It was told so that we would be horrified and then do something about it. It's time that we do.